Hi everyone. Right, I think I should be live now. So could someone just put in the chat they can hear me okay? Cool, thanks. All right. So yeah, I think a few people are still joining the session. While they're joining, I'll just sort of introduce the sessions, how they're going to work. So my name's Michael, and I'll be leading the sessions for the next 8 weeks. So they're going to run every Friday at 5:30, and I'm basically sort of going to talk you through some of the basics of Python and sort of build up from there. So hopefully by the end of these 8 weeks, you'll have a lot more confidence in Python. You'll be able to sort of spend time independently learning this yourselves as well, and get better. Get better at it through maybe doing your own projects, and you should have the skills to use all the resources available on the internet, um, to use them to help build up your understanding. So it's really about teaching you the basics, because I think the hardest part of learning to code is the start, really, where all of it's new, all of it doesn't really make much sense at all. Once you get past that part, then you can build up quite quickly and independently as well. So that's hopefully the stage we're going to get to. So we're going to have half an hour of these sessions where I will sort of teach the main content of the lessons, and then 15 minutes at the end where you can ask any questions, and I'll answer them. But also feel free to use the chat throughout the stream as well. So if you have any questions throughout, put them in. And also I'll try and make the sessions interactive as well, by asking questions about what we're doing. And feel free to use the chat to answer those questions as well. Okay. Right, so okay, I will just go to share my screen, so just give me 1 second. Okay, so you should be able to see this now. Okay. Right, so yeah. So I'll just start by introducing what we're going to be doing today. Okay. Right. So, right. So what I'd recommend with these sessions is either you can use Replit to write code yourselves and run it, and this is an online coding platform. Some of you may have used it before. It's quite easy to use. So basically, you just log in, create an account, and then it's free to use. There are upgrades you can do, but the free version is fine for what we're doing. So you can just click this to create a Replit. So we're going to be working in Python. It will give you a generated title. So I'll just call this session 1. Create the Replit, and then it opens this screen here. So from this, you can write your code in here. You'll then run it in the console over here. And there's various tools, but you don't need to worry too much about them for now. Just going to add the chat box to here as well. So just give me 1 second to do that. So I can see what you're typing then. Okay, cool. Should be able to see the chat box now. Okay. So anyway, as I said, we're going to go through variables first. So variables are essentially you have a name and then an equal sign, and on the other side of that we have the value. So we have a number of different data types this value can be. So we could have an integer, so we could store the value 0 in this variable, and we can give the variable a name. So we could call it a counter. So it could be used to count how many times we've done something. So we're going to start that as 0 like so. But you can also store different data types in here as well. So here you have an integer, but you can also store strings, booleans, and also floats as well. And there's a few other data types, but these are the main ones we're going to look at for now. So yeah, here we have an integer, and if we were to have a string, this is essentially a piece of text. So it could be like name equals John Doe or something. This is a string. And if we look at what a Boolean is essentially a true or false value. So if you have something that can take two different values, true or false, either off or on, then you would use a Boolean value. So an example might be if you have a variable called authenticated to represent if the user has entered their login details and authenticated themselves to the system, you could use a Boolean variable for this. So you could set that to false, and when they have authenticated themselves, you could change that to true. Okay. And the final data type is a float. And a float could be basically a number, but it has a decimal part to it. So it could be like, could say value, and this is going to equal 37.1. So we see that it has a number part to it and then a decimal part afterwards as well. Whereas an integer is just a whole number. Okay. So going back to strings again as well, something I should have said before, we used quotation marks to show that this is a string. So where we have counter equals 0 before, if we put quotation marks around it, it's no longer an integer, it's now a string. So even though it's still 0, if it has quotation marks around it, it becomes a string, so you can no longer use it as an integer. And we'll see what that means in a moment. So strings use quotation marks. Okay. So moving on then, let's look at manipulating variables then. So let's start with the integer. Now you can do any sort of mathematical operation to this. You could decide to add one to the counter. So if we just move that down here so it's all clear, or we could add any sort of value. We can even have a second variable and add these variables together. So for instance, we might have add equals 5, and we're going to do counter equals counter plus add. And this is really important. So we have essentially, this is a key piece of syntax that we'll reuse a lot. We have the variable name and then a value. And this value, it could just be an explicit value like 0, or it could be an expression using values and variable names. So in this case, we're doing counter equals counter plus add. Counter is 0, add is 5. So we do 0 plus 5 to give 5, and counter would now store 5. Okay. We can do more stuff here as well. We could do counter equals counter times 5. We could even make the expression more complicated using brackets and have a second expression. So add divided by 5 or something. So for instance now, if we run this code, let's just comment out the stuff at the top here. So we have add equals 5, counter equals 0, counter equals counter plus add, and then counter equals counter times 5 plus add divided by 5, which is what these symbols mean. So the star means multiply, the slash means divide. So if we did this expression, if we ran this, what would counter now be? So if someone could put in the chat if they know the answer. Okay. Okay, I'm going to hope that the chat is working. It's fine if people are not sure. But in this case, if we walk through this, we're going to have counter equals 5, as we said here. And then we're going to do 5 times 5 here to give 25. And then add divide by 5. So we get 25 plus 1 to give 26. And we then print out the counter. And this should hopefully print 26. Yeah, 26.0. Okay. And this is another key word in Python, a print statement. So we could just print 26, or we can make this a bit nicer and contextualize it as well. And for this, we could print out a string before it. So we could say the value of counter is counter. I've put this at the end here where I've got str counter. And this essentially is going to convert this integer value to string. And the reason we need to do this is that if we're going to print something out, we're printing out a string. So it needs to first all be converted into one string. So this is what we're doing. We have this plus symbol to basically take this first part and this second part and combine them together. And then this would be outputted. So we can see here, yeah. Yep. Okay. So, yeah, if we move on then, and let's look at strings. So we've already seen how we can concatenate two strings together, merge two strings together. So let's say if we have first name is John, surname is Doe. Now I want to print out the name is John Doe. So there's a few parts to this. We have the name is, we have first name, and we have surname. And we're going to concatenate them, the three together, just as we did in line 17. Except this time, first name and surname are both strings, so we don't need to convert them. Could someone put in the chat how we would join all these together and then print them out? So I'll give you about 30 seconds to have a think about this. It's very similar to line 17. Okay. Just in case you're a bit stuck, I'll help you out with the first part. So we have the name is, and then we're going to need a plus after this. And remember we had the counter here. It's going to be followed by first name and then also by surname. So what would that line of code look like? Okay. So I think I'll go through it now for anyone who's not sure. So we'd write first name after this. And then also, if we want to, we can add a space here. So that will basically print a space after John here. And then we'd see here, we're going to have surname, and that's it. So the name is, and then space, first name John, space, and then surname Doe. That's what we see printed. So I'll just comment this out. Let's see if this works. The name is John Doe. Yeah. Okay. You can see someone had a go with that. It's good. Okay. So I think hopefully people are getting this now. If you do have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat as well. Happy to answer them at the end of the session. Okay, so let's look now at, I think we've done a bit about variables. So the next thing we said we'd look at was if statements. So let's look at an if statement involving counter. So if we just get rid of this, put that down there. So if statements basically look like this. We have if, and then we have a certain condition, and then a colon. And then after this colon, we leave a small gap here. So you can see that my cursor has been indented ever so slightly. And this basically shows that what I'm about to write is inside of this if statement. So it'd be if, and then some sort of condition, and then you do something. So it might be like, if something's true, then print counter. And the condition might be if counter is greater than 0. And we can see the counter is 26, so we should see 26.0 is printed, yeah. Comment this out. Okay, we can have lots of different expressions here. So anything involving mathematical symbols and other things as well. So we have greater than, less than, equal to, greater than or equal to, and less than or equal to. And we can also have not equal to as well. So hopefully you've seen these symbols in maths. I think the two ones that may be a bit confusing are 23 and 26. So this specifically uses two equal signs. So this helps distinguish it from just when you're assigning a value to a variable. So you're saying is equal to. And then here you're saying is not equal to. So give you another question to do. Let's say now we know counter equals 26. So we already worked out before. So we know that counter will be printed here. Now what if we also have another if statement that says if counter does not equal 26, print counter does not equal 26. This shouldn't be printed here. So let's see if that condition works. Yeah, I need to comment these out. And we see that just 26.0 is printed, nothing else. However, if we change this to counter is equal to 26, then we should see print counter equal 26. Should probably change it to this, yeah. Okay. So a lot of this is just maths, really. So thinking about taking a problem and thinking what should the condition look like. So let's say I tell you to write an if statement to check that counter is less than, say, less than 30. What would that if statement look like? Yep, very close there. So you just need to change the sign the other way around to make it a less than. So if counter less than 30, then yeah, that would be perfect. So we say if counter is less than 30, and then print counter is less than 30. And yeah, now let me make it a bit trickier. So we're going to have a variable. Let me get rid of all this code. We're going to have a second variable. Let's say this is total. Total is going to equal 50. And we're going to basically say write an if statement that checks if total is bigger than counter multiplied by 2. So this is a bit trickier this time. So if anyone knows that, could they put that into the chat? And remember that to multiply we use the asterisk here. Yeah, very close there. So it wouldn't be equals. We'd have if total is greater than counter times by 2. And also, if we were to do equal to, if we change that, remember it's 2 equal signs. So not just 1, we use 1 when we're assigning a value, such as when we did total equals 50. And then we use 2 equal signs when we're checking that 2 values match each other, like so. Yeah. Okay. One other thing before I go into questions that we need to have a look at, and that's elif statements and else statements. So we can also say that if this isn't true, essentially elif else if this is not true. If so else means that if this is not true, and then you can do elif, saying that, let's say, total is greater than counter times 2. Just add this in here. And we can have that here. And we can have another elif statement as well. This time saying that count total is less than counter times 2. And you can also have an else statement. Now in this case, we've covered all the possible scenarios, so there isn't really a need, but an else is basically any other case. So if none of the conditions before are satisfied, then print impossible in this case. So you wouldn't need to write this in this case because it's always going to satisfy one of these 3. But just to illustrate how it works, this is what an else statement would look like. So yeah, you don't always need to write elifs or else statements. They're optional. So an if statement can just be an if and nothing else. You could have an if and then an else. You could just have an if and then a few elifs. So it's all optional, really. Okay. Right, so we've got a bit of time for questions now, I think. So does anyone have any questions about anything we've just been through there that they'd like me to go over in a bit more detail again? So we've been through quite a lot of content there in half an hour. So I'm sure there's some stuff that you'd like to go over that maybe wasn't clear the first time around. Just while we're waiting for questions as well, if you want to run this on your own machine, you can download Python. Pretty easy to find the link. I've put the link in the description as well. So it should be fairly easy to install. There's plenty of guides online of how to do this. You'll also need to install an IDE. That's basically a name for a code editor. Now, I'd recommend using Visual Studio Code or VS Code. There are lots of IDEs out there. They all really do the same thing. So it's really up to you. But this is the one I usually use. So yeah, you can go to use link down below if you want to install it on your own machine. That obviously makes it a little bit easier for you. But Replit is fine for what we're doing at the moment as well. So yeah, get your questions in if you have any. If not, then I might have to start asking you some questions to go through yourselves as well. So we've still got about 9 minutes left. So just to talk you through as well what we will move on to next lesson. So we need to still look at inputting values. So we'll obviously have a quick recap over if statements and data types. So I'll probably quiz you on the different data types there are: integers, strings, booleans, floats. Maybe give you a quick quiz over what should be printed and stuff, depending on certain if statements. And then we'll also look at inputting values and how that works before then moving on to loops as well, I think. Okay, if no one's got any questions, but as it looks like no one has, I'll give you some more questions to do. So one thing we didn't really look at there too much was if statements involving strings. So let's say we have, let's bring in first name and surname. Maybe it's deleted that. Oh, there we go. Okay, so go down here. Right. So let's say we have some if statements here. We say if first name is equal to John, like this. And then we have an else, which says print first name doesn't equal John. What should be printed here? Make sure you read it carefully. Yeah, perfect. Yeah. Yeah. So it has to be exactly equal. Yeah. So we go to the else statement and then print first name doesn't equal John. Okay. Apologize if there's a bit of a delay. I guess because I'm streaming on YouTube, there's probably about 30 seconds between when you enter the chats and when I actually see them. Which obviously makes it a little bit stop and start. Right, we've got 3 minutes left. So does anyone have any questions about anything we've been through today? Any questions about what we're going to cover later on in the session? So next week or beyond then? Or any questions generally about learning to code? I'm happy to answer any of those. Okay, I'm just going to give it another minute or so, and then we'll have to end the session. But yeah, just to talk you through again what we're going to be doing next week. So we'll look quickly at inputting values. This isn't too complicated. And then also we will move on to looking at loops as well. So loops are essentially when you repeat a block of code over and over until a certain condition is met. We can also look at using lists in Python, so storing multiple values. And then once we've done all this, we can sort of bring it all together in a small task. And hopefully you can all have a go at this as well. But obviously I will give you some help to get started on it as well, and talk you through it, and then yeah, see how that goes. Yep, this will be running these sessions every Friday at 5:30 for the next 8 weeks. So this is the first session. So it runs until around about the end of July. So yeah, hope you can join me next Friday again as well. Okay, I don't think we have any questions at all. But yeah, if you want to ask me questions next week as well, you feel free to do so. All right. Anyway, thanks for joining the stream. Hope to see you next Friday.